Supervisor asked me to write him a report of what I've done so far. And boom, when I sat down to actually write, I realized that I've forgotten some of the steps and procedures I actually used to set up my experimental work in the lab and as well as my simulation in the computer. And I immediately realized that if I continue that way, I will end up stuck when it is time for me to write all those things. If I have forgotten what happened. Hello, research community. Our today discussion will be on tips for writing your thesis without getting stuck. Yes, you heard me right. You can actually write your thesis without getting stuck. And this was from my own personal experience. And that's how I come up with these 5 points or tips I will be sharing with you today that helped me to write my master's thesis from beginning to the end without getting stuck. To the point that by the time I was finishing with my simulation, I was almost done with my chapter 5, only waiting for that part to be included. It happens that when I started my master's, I was of the mind that I will write by the time I'm done with my lab or my workshop experiment and my simulation. Then I will then find time to sit down to write all I've done. That would have been the biggest mistake I would have made that stage or that time. Okay, but I was glad that something happened at the early stage that made me to retrace my stuff. And what happened was that my supervisor asked me to write him a report of what I've done so far. And boom, when I sat down to actually write, I realized that I've forgotten some of the steps and procedures I actually used to set up my experimental work in the lab and as well as my simulation in the computer. And I immediately realized that if I continue that way, I will end up stuck when it is time for me to write all those things. If I have forgotten what happened just few months ago, how would then will I remember what happened when it's already maybe 1 year after? So then I developed these steps, which I'll be sharing with you while giving you the steps on how I was able to overcome those processes. Then the first I will share with you today is write as you go. So form the habit of writing as you go. Everything I did in the lab or in my computer setting up the simulation, I make sure I jot them down every day in bullet points. And how do I do that? I will start with, okay, point 1, I did this. Point 2, I did that. Then I did this. So I jot them down in bullet form, noting down all the steps I actually followed to set up my experiment or my simulation. Then, if there is any of the steps where I encountered little challenges in the process, then I will also write what kind of challenges I encountered and how I was able to overcome it. Now, you can decide to write it like in a sentence form, but that's what I did, and I'm sharing it exactly how I did it. Okay, why I jot down those challenges is because actually thesis writing or your thesis is actually a storytelling book that tells a story of how you started your research work and how you ended it and what you found in the process. So it's not just you telling about the success stories. No, the examiners are actually paying attention to see how you were able to adapt to the process, the challenges you encountered, and how you were able to overcome them. That is actually the process of mastering. Mastering. Because for you to master, there are some challenges that you overcome. It's in the process of overcoming those challenges that some abilities and capabilities are developed that made you a master in the subject. I said, write as you go. So I begin to do what? Jot down those things. But you will see that this write as you go, still reflecting almost the stages. But that is the first point, write as you go. Then, what is the second point? Then, in the process, I develop what I call start with the thesis skeleton. Now, in the first stage, you've jotted some point. Remember what I said when it comes to the issue of the jotting some point. So, why you jot the point or sentences, according to the saying that says, the shortest pen is longer than the longest memory. So those things you jot will serve as a reminder by the time you are set for the next stage to develop your thesis further. It will help you to remember every point or every procedure you took in carrying out a particular aspect of your research. Having said that, then we will then move on to the step 2 or tip 2 or point 2, whatever you choose to call it, which what I call it then is what? Develop the thesis skeleton or start with the thesis skeleton. At this point, I was only developing things further from what? The bullet I jotted. I didn't care about the sentence construction or construct. I didn't care about the grammar. I didn't care about most things. I was just writing it almost like a story to say, okay, I was able to set up this, and then after this, I moved to this. Then I was able to do this. Then this happened. I encountered this problem. Then I was able to adjust this. And when I adjusted that, then that issue stopped. So I was developing the skeleton. At this point, remember that almost everything you do has a place in each of the chapters, depending. Number one, the things you encountered or you did could prompt you on the literature, some literatures you need to review or aspect of the literature that you need to review. Then that takes you to search for some articles and review some literature in the process. Also, that forms part of your work, your methodology chapter. Then you are developing something that pertains to the methodology. It could also inform you some things about the introduction. So at this point, you are developing the skeleton of each of the sections of your thesis. Then that will help you to go into the next stage. But that wasn't my next stage. The next step or the tip I will share with you today, which I did, was that the same way you jot down everything you did at the end of the day, you reflect on your work weekly. So at the end of every week, create a time to sit down to reflect on all you've done so far. Like for me, my work was experimental. For those that are maybe carrying out interview or whatever, you reflect on the interviews you conducted, then you begin to pick up some patterns. That's when you'll be able to connect the dots of some certain things. Then from the experiment, you'll be able to connect the dots of things that happened. You might, in the process of reflecting, pick up why the challenges you encountered earlier actually came up. Then maybe in the process of the next stage, you'll be able to overcome or avoid some things that cause your first challenges. So you reflect on your work, on your weekly work. You begin to connect the dots. Okay, this is what happened. Oh, this is actually what happened the following day. Actually, I think this thing happened the following day because of what I did in the first day. That's actually what makes up your thesis. That is actually the stories you're telling that will entice your examiner. And for me, for me that I'm not that type that easily write manually. But don't get me wrong, I do. But why I prefer to write it electronically on my words is because it saves my time of retyping again. But don't get me wrong, writing has its own advantage. I do it as well. Because if you write, it makes what you do to stick more in your memory, more than when you type. In the process of the thesis, I do more of what? Typing them out, of how those things connect, which will then add up to my skeleton, which I'm building. But don't think that the skeleton is what you build once. No, you are continuously building the skeleton as you go along the way. Now, what you do again is, as the time permits you, you begin to develop the skeleton better. You begin to fine tune it better, okay, as you go, right? Now, after that, then you begin to now improve after reflecting, because by the time you reflect for the week, then you go to the next stage, which is the T, number 4, improve on your skeleton. Now, improving on your skeleton means adjusting the sentences, removing some things that you think you made a mistake while developing the skeleton, adding new things you discovered along the way you were conducting your research. Because there might be some certain things that came up earlier that actually then change in the process. Remember, as you're researching, you are gaining more understanding about the subject matter. There are some things you thought were right at the beginning that has changed over time because of your knowledge. Then you improve on your skeleton. You continuously improve on it. Don't wait for a certain time to do it. Do it continuously as the time permits. If you are walking along the way and something drops in your memory, thank God for the days you have cell phones and whatever. You can go to your cell phone note and note on certain things. Then when you get back home, you do what? You add it to the skeleton. That is improving the skeleton with the idea that dropped or the new thing you encounter, probably reviewing a literature. Then the final stage is what? You polish your thesis. Now, this stage is in 2 parts. The first is, that's when probably you are done with your lab work, you are done with your interview, you are done with the analysis, you are now writing up. Then you build up on the skeleton that you've developed further. That is when you now be mindful of the sentence constructions. That's when you begin to be mindful of what? The grammatical issues. That's when you begin to be mindful of what? The field and the way they present the subject. So the data presentations and how they present it, because those in engineering present differently. Those in accounting present differently. So meaning you begin to now write this your thesis to be able to what? Fitting into the field. Then you also consult the articles and see how they presented, or other theses and how they presented. Then you begin to adjust yours to fit into those processes. The second part of it is, no man is an island. Try to get someone to look into your work. That will give you a new idea, a new perspective. Then by the time they review and give you some constructive criticism, then you do what? You go back and what? Polish and improve on it more with the what? With the input made by your friends or colleague or whoever. In all this, if you notice, I did not mention your supervisor. But in all this, because by the time you develop your skeleton, you might not give your supervisor something that it's not well polished in a way. But what you must do in the process is that at every stage, make out time to discuss what you're doing with your supervisor. Make out time to bounce off idea from him. Remember, they've gone ahead of you. They have the knowledge, the experience. Yes, you might know the subject matter more than them, but their experience will always make them to be ahead of you. So, discuss at every of these stages. Any problem you encountered, bounce off idea from them. Any challenges in the process, or you're writing something, you might not go to ask your supervisor, how do I write it? No. But if you're writing something, an idea pop up, and you think it worth clarifying further, you can ask your supervisor, because you must make sure that you are in alignment with your supervisor all the time at every stage. Because sometimes, if you're not in alignment with them, you might write in such a way that at the end of the day, they will tell you, no, you did not present this right, that you have to go back again. So at every stage, make sure you do what? You are in alignment with your supervisor. So these are the tips or the points or the steps I took while writing my master's thesis, to the point that by the time my experiment work was done or almost done, my chapter 5, which is the discussion, in chapter 4, which is the presentation of the data, were almost ready. I was only waiting for the simulation to complete. Then I analyze the result and include it on the part of the simulation because I was done already with the experimental work. So these are the steps that if you follow, I bet you the days you will sit in front of your computer with a blank mind will be minimized. You will enjoy even the writing because you are not starting from a blank page. There is already something you are building on. Remember that improving what you've done, it's much more easier than starting from the scratch, especially when you've allowed things to lapse and you've forgotten some point or important point of what you did in the process. I hope I was able to enlighten you or give you a good tips on how to go about this. So if you are starting your research or master's, PhD, MBA, or whatever in this 2025, take these steps from the beginning. Then at the end of the day, you will be glad you did. Write as you go, point 1. Point 2 is what? Start with the thesis skeleton without minding how grammar is, the constructions and whatever. Then the point number 3, make sure you reflect on what you did at the end of every week. And then use the dots and things you connected to improve. Then point number 4 is what? Improve on what you've written. That is something you do continuously, not just once a thing. And the last one is what? The polishing stage, which I say there are 2 parts of it. When you polish, writing it according to the field, developing it based on how your field present their result or chapters, then reading articles to help you write it better academically. And then the second part is what? Sending to someone who can read and give you a constructive criticism so that you'll be able to improve it further. But in all, I said, in each of the stage, make sure you carry your supervisor along. Do not leave them behind because leaving them behind is costly and it might take you back to the stage where you've passed, and it's demoralizing when that happens. And I hope this point helped you. If that helped you, do well to like, comment. Also, because it's very important, share your experience so that we all will learn. We are a community and we are trying to educate each other to help us to go through this research, this monster called research process much more easier. Comment on the, put on the comment section your experience and or which method actually assisted you in writing your own thesis. And then finally, follow us. Follow us across the social medias, subscribe so that by the time we post new individual experiences or tips that will help you in each of the stages